standard and a judge in the essay contests on Ayn Rand's novels Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead and Anthem. Robert has also taught American history to homeschooled students in History at Our House, and his speech is titled "The Constitution Formed a More Perfect Union." Robert Begley.
If you can't hear me in the back, just make a motion, okay? I'm going to try to project here. That's my audition for Matt's next music. If I didn't win, at least wearing the shirt might give me some kudos. We the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union. So begins the eloquent preamble of the U.S. Constitution. On September 17, 1787, the Founding Fathers signed the Constitution and solved the political problem of the ages by defining the proper relationship between the individual and the state. They created the first government in history based on the recognition of the inalienable rights of the citizens. The founders looked out at the world and they saw an individual, and realized that the individual is sovereign and has rights by definition, and that the government's purpose is to secure these rights. Now, prior to this, the individual's life was always the subordinate, whether it's with the king, the church, the group, the tribe, the state, or the collective. Now, after this historic event took place, an anonymous writer named Plebeian summarized. Frankly, if I wrote something anonymous, I don't know if I could call myself a plebeian. I might do something a little bit more grand. But he says, almost all governments that have arisen among mankind have sprung from force and violence. The records of history inform us of none that have been the result of cool and dispassionate reason and reflection. It is reserved for this favored country to exhibit to mankind the first example. Now, I love this description because it shows that America is the product of the age of reason and enlightenment. So what kind of government did the founders form? Well, my friend Tom kind of stole my thunder by saying it, but I'm going to repeat it for those who came late. Article 4, Section 4, in my handy-dandy Constitution. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion. So this means that America is a republic, which comes from the Greek term the people, but is backed by a written constitution. Hence, our nation is a constitutional republic. Now, you've already heard it before, but I'm going to clarify it one more time. When I use the term Republican, it has nothing to do with today's Republican Party or Democratic Party. Sadly, because these parties don't uphold the Constitution the way that they should. Now, at this point, you might ask, and you actually heard someone ask the question, what should the government do? What is its proper function? Only one, to protect the inalienable rights of its citizens. Which rights? Well, we could go to that other brilliant founding document, Declaration of Independence. It states life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, how can rights be violated, you might ask? Only by force. So therefore, we need the police to protect us from criminals, we need the military to protect us from foreign invaders, and we need objectively defined laws and courts to settle disputes. Now I just want to take a step back to give you a little bit. You've heard some of the preliminary leading up to the Declaration and the American Revolution, and Matt's program is going to bring you back even before, but 1776, America declared independence. And that's a great thing to do, but you still have to go out and win the war. And once they were fighting the war, I remember when I was, I think, 3rd grade, I read the story of George Washington leading this ragtag army against the most powerful country on the planet. And at that time, Washington became my first hero. Actually, Spider-Man was my first hero. I remember debating back and forth. Spider-Man goes from building to building, but Washington crossed the Delaware, so I don't know, who do I go with here, you know? And I couldn't tell my brothers because they liked Iron Man and Captain America and the thing, so that would like introduce a whole new element. So, one story about Washington, he was on the run in a place in the wilderness in New Jersey, and he was with his two right-hand men, or his left-hand man and his right-hand man, two of his aides de camp, General Lafayette, who came in from France, and my favorite founder, Alexander Hamilton, 21-year-old Alexander Hamilton. And they're in a town that's now called Paterson, which is in Paterson, New Jersey. And Hamilton says, he points to the 70-foot waterfalls called Great Falls. And he tells Washington, after we win this war, see how confident Hamilton was, he says, we must harness that power. Basically 2 billion gallons of water coming every day. And Hamilton knew that Washington was a surveyor, he was a great businessman, and Hamilton had a lot of interest in business and industry as well. So that was his projection of what would happen. And the two of them formed the best partnership. Hamilton and Washington formed the best partnership in American history. Washington, as the older, demonstrated this leadership that was unparalleled, and Hamilton was this brilliant, rambunctious guy who went out of line sometimes and had to be reeled in, but just absolutely brilliant, self-made man. So after America finally won the war, it took 7 years to do so, they had to figure out what kind of government they would have, hence the Constitutional Convention. Now, as David had said, they had this Articles of Confederation, but there was a lot of turmoil between the states. They had different currency, and between Hamilton and James Madison were kind of the two that spearheaded this Constitutional Convention to take place. And they enlisted Washington to preside over it. Washington eventually became the first president in world history. So, after the Constitution was passed, we now have the two most important documents in American history, which is the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And they're what I call the perfect union. And in terms of fulfilling the requirements of human life, I don't think anything is even in its league. Now, was this Constitution fully consistent? Unfortunately not. There were some contradictions, none greater than the issue of slavery, which obviously is a violation of individual rights. And Hamilton wanted slavery abolished right then and there. He saw that contradiction, and he wanted it abolished right at the Constitutional Convention, when he couldn't get enough votes. And he went on to form the Manumission Society, which led to slavery being abolished here in New York. And he predicted that someday this conflict is going to boil over. Someday there will be a civil war between North and South, but the industrialist, capitalist North would defeat the agrarian, slave-based South. Now, no matter what, as inconsistent as this Constitution might have been, there never had been, nor has there ever been since, any form of government more consistent with protecting individual rights. So following the Civil War, when Hamilton's prediction came true and the North won and abolished slavery, we witnessed the greatest period of freedom in world history. And the result, now that the mind was free, it was unleashed to create incredible innovations. We had these inventors, Samuel Morse, Alexander Graham Bell, George Westinghouse, Nikola Tesla, and the granddaddy of them all. I'm a citizen, that's bad. They made all these life-promoting products that enhance our lives. Incredible, just absolutely incredible. Then on the other side, we have these great industrialists, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, J.D. Rockefeller, who made it able to go, you know how big the country is, but they reshaped the land so you can go from this little tiny corner all the way to the other end and back, safely, cheaply, quickly. Then we had medical advances. Dr. James Marion Sims opened the first hospital for women here in New York City. And there's a great statue of him on 103rd Street and 5th Avenue. We had improvements in sanitary conditions with soap and disinfectants. So the result was a population explosion. In 1850, the U.S. had 23 million population. By 1900, they had 76 million. That's a triple, and that includes losing 600,000 during the Civil War. So we had incredible prosperity, incredible standards of living being raised, and life expectancy being raised. Now keep in mind, historically, 99% of mankind's history, 99% of the population have survived on bare subsistence. Famines were regular parts of Europe. In fact, my father was born in Ireland, and I'm sure his father's father's father was affected by the Irish potato famine in the 1840s. But the point is, when you have, once the mind is free to create, the United States will never have a famine. And the other result is that people from all over the globe came to America to share in the American dream, risk their lives to come here. Now, this foreign love of America is kind of personal to me. That's why I have a lot of foreign friends, because they understand what life is like in the other parts of the world, whereas I feel like too many Americans take for granted what we have here. But this idea is epitomized by one of my favorite revolutionary leaders, Frenchman Lafayette, who was very popular. He came to America right before he died, and he was greeted by everyone. But he took back with him a couple of crates of dirt from the country, so that when he went back to Paris, or France, excuse me, and died, he said he wanted to be buried in American soil. So every time I go downtown and I see that street with his name on it, that's what I think of. Now, unfortunately, over the past century, the political climate and terminology has changed. Now, if you ask people, what kind of government does America have? They'll say, democracy, popular will, the right to vote. And majority rule has become more important than individual rights. I did a search on brainyquote.com. Anyone ever look at that stuff? It's very cool. To see what famous people thought about democracy. Barack Obama says, no democracy works without compromise. George Bush says you can't put democracy and freedom back in the box. JFK said the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of all. Woodrow Wilson dragged an unwilling America into World War I in order to make the world safe for democracy. So here we have this equation of democracy with freedom, with security, with safety, with compromise, but where's individual rights? Now, democracy is also of Greek derivation. Demos means people, but krasi means a type of rule. So it's the rule of the people, usually majority rule. Now, I think Europeans actually have a better understanding of this term. Now, let's see what they have to say about it. Oscar Wilde says democracy means simply the bludgeoning of the people, by the people, for the people. Karl Marx said democracy is the road to socialism. And he was proved correct several decades later when a fellow German named Adolf Hitler was democratically elected and very popular. Keep in mind that Nazi means National Socialism, where people are reduced to being treated like animals. Now, the Founding Fathers, what did they think about it? Well, Benjamin Franklin said democracy is two wolves and a lamb deciding what's for lunch. But liberty, he said, is a well-armed lamb. Alexander Hamilton was totally against democracy, which he thought majority rule would lead to mob rule. He said, we are a republican government. Real liberty is never found in despotism or the extremes of democracy. Now they remember that in ancient Greece, the majority voted to put Socrates to death. They wanted no part of that. So what about you? Why should you care what kind of government we have? Because words have meanings. And part of the solution is not democracy. Democracy is the problem. So if you walk away with anything tonight, understand two things. One, individual rights are the fundamental issue in politics. And two, America is a constitutional republic, not a democracy. Now sadly, this past century's shift in the government's role has gone from protecting individual rights to violating those rights in order to give to some at the expense of others. The term rights has even been perverted so that we can have the right to health care, the right to education, the right to housing. But health care, housing, and education don't grow in nature. They have to be provided by someone. Free health care for some means slave labor for those who are forced to pay for it. Slavery was abolished in 1865. But we've reached the point where the entitlement state appeals to politicians so that the one who promises the most people, the most goodies, ends up winning elections. And the scope of government expansion into improper areas has caused a fundamental inversion so that now it is we the people who are limited in what we can freely do, and the government is unlimited in what they can do. Try to build something brand new and bring it to market, and you will have any of the regulatory agencies down your throat. FCC, SEC, EPA, DEP, and on and on and on. Thomas Edison had over 1,000 patents. If he was alive today, he wouldn't be able to get one of them done. The process is too long, it's too expensive. And if that's the case, we'd have no film industry, because he invented the moving pictures, which led to films. We'd have no record industry, he invented the gramophone, which led to recorded music. And we'd be sitting in the dark. Now this concentration of power inevitably leads to abuses in power. Not only in wealth redistribution, but also in violations of freedom of speech and privacy, such as the IRS targeting scandal or the NSA mass surveillance scandal. But it's not too late to turn the tide. We still have enough freedom of speech to promote our values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Celebrating the Constitution, as we're doing today, is one way to do this because we can educate others about the fundamental issues still open to us. But if we look at history, we can see that majority rule does usually lead to mob rule, where people do end up acting like animals. Look at the Occupy Wall Street movement, look at any anti-war protests. We haven't had an anti-war protest in like 5 years, right? Imagine if Romney was in, we've seen Michael Moore's face all over the place, and Martin Sheen and Sean Penn. But the reverse is that, as a contrast, if the government does protect rights, the mind is free to create the abundance of products that make our lives comfortable and happy. So in conclusion, to highlight this difference, a quote from Ayn Rand. If a drought strikes them, animals perish. Man builds irrigation canals. If a flood strikes them, animals perish. Man builds dams. If a carnivorous pack attacks them, animals perish. Man writes the Constitution of the United States. Take some questions. Do you have time? We went a bit long.
Yeah. Be brief.
Okay. Yes.
You left out the very best quote of all about democracy. H.L. Mencken. He said, Democracy is the theory that the people know what they want and they deserve to get it, good and hard.
Right, I saw that on Brady quote. I had to cut it down. Yeah, exactly.
All right, so
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much.
Dara may want it. Okay, so I have the pleasure of introducing Dara Grieger. She is